Hello everyone, my name is John, and I'm the nerd with no job, and in this video I would like to offer a nerdy take on the long-awaited TV series The Last of Us, based on Naughty Dog's 2013 game of the same name. Now while I had a copy back then, I never got around to finishing it, and with the release of the show I figured now was the best time, so I went out and got myself a copy of the remake and dove right in. While it failed to capture on its original release, the remake has succeeded in drawing me right in. To start, I'd like to set the stage by going over the game itself before we dive into the show. The Last of Us was released on the PlayStation 3 originally, and has subsequently grown into a hit despite the main focus of the game being around the story campaign. There was a multiplayer mode, but unlike other popular games that became juggernauts, like Call of Duty, Overwatch, other esports-based games, the fan-favorite part of this is the story mode. Spoilers for the game ahead. The key difference for the zombies in the game is they are not the result of a viral outbreak. They are a fungal-based infection. The inspiration is drawn from the cordyceps genus of fungi, a breed that is parasitic and uses small animals such as insects and other arthropods, spiders and the like, as hosts. The fungus overtakes and controls the animal, infecting and slowly consuming it from the inside out, leading to the fungal growths that eventually protrude from it. At the end of the host's infected lifespan, it goes to a high point and awaits the end, digging in deep. It's a truly horrifying possibility. Thankfully, in real life, this fungi has yet to be strong enough to infect humans, but The Last of Us asks, what if it could? And this leads to the creation of some very unique-looking zombies, with designs that at once combine the older, more classical, emaciated, and decayed looks with these grotesque fungal growths all over their bodies. And while this will definitely stick in your mind, it really gives it a unique look that is all its own. The game of the story opens on Joel and his daughter Sarah in their Texan home going about a normal day. It's Joel's birthday and Sarah would like to celebrate by spending some time with him, leading to her falling asleep on the couch, being carried upstairs, and that's when we jump to the next scene where she is awoken by the phone ringing. She's been returned to her room, and Joel is nowhere to be found. On the other end of the phone, it's her Uncle Tommy desperately trying to get a hold of her father, but the phone line goes dead before he can tell her what's going on. The tension continues to ramp as Sarah searches the house for her father, only to have him run in the back door and begin searching for his gun. He appears quite distressed. Before he can fully explain to Sarah what is going on, one of the neighbors breaks in through the glass door, screaming, howling, throwing himself at Joel. Joel is forced to shoot the man, and while Sarah is looking. Before she can even reconcile that her father has killed the neighbor, he rushes her out the house to Tommy's waiting car. They go on a drive, and the player is granted a view of the opening hours of the outbreak. This entire sequence is very quick and very tense, not giving the player much time to breathe or really take a look at the surroundings around them. And it's right up until its extremely sad conclusion that this pace continues. Following the prologue, we jump ahead 20 years, to catch up with a world-weary Joel, who is now living with a woman named Tess, and the two of them run a smuggling operation, one of the safe zones set up by the government called quarantine zones. These zones are run as a brutal military dictatorship, where the slightest misstep can be punishable by death. Food is scarce, and trust is even more so. Fighting against this monolithic regime are the Fireflies, self-branded freedom fighters that seem to at once be succeeding and failing against the soldiers of Fedra. Joel and Tess aren't really concerned with these groups, seeing them as more annoying and lethal obstacles than sides to be chosen. The biggest concern for them, the counterpart was trying to scam them out of some merchandise. The series of events where they go after him is quite intense, and ends with Joel and Tess in charge of a young girl named Ellie, tasked by a Firefly to take Ellie outside the quarantine zone and into Boston proper, where her compatriots are waiting. This is where the main story really kicks off, with the world-weary and shut-off Joel interacting with a young and outspoken Ellie. Over the course of the story, a bond grows between the pair, and Joel seems to find some of the humanity he has lost over the last 2 decades. Given its popularity and the character focus of the narrative, this has made the game ripe for an adaptation to the big or small screen, and rumors persisted for years that it was in production. In recent years we got set pics, casting confirmations, and assurances that it was on track. Now in 2023, the game-turned-movie-turned-show has arrived at last from HBO, starring Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey as the protagonists of this fungi-based zombie apocalypse. In the games, Joel is depicted as a large, quiet, tough guy, just trying to survive in a world that has fallen apart and given up on rebuilding. He commits horrible acts of violence, typically in defense of himself, or when provoked. Pascal captures this tough guy act very well, of course with some changes. His accent isn't as thick as the one adopted by Troy Baker during the game, and naturally he looks like himself as opposed to a custom-made video game character. Through the first episode, we see him act mostly in line with how Joel is portrayed in the show. What differences I spotted I will discuss a little later on, but for the most part, he plays the role very well. Ramsey, likewise, does a fantastic job portraying a far younger character who has not been through any of the same things as Joel, but has had her own unique horrific experiences. Given the only other role I know her from is Lyanna Mormont of Game of Thrones, can she go from local girl too angry to die, the meme, or to the emotional centerpiece of this story? Small spoilers here. She doesn't have much screen time in the first episode, certainly not as much as Joel, so it's hard to get a feel for how Ramsey plays the character, but she does hit several of the main memorable moments very well, and I'm very excited to see where it goes, and I will discuss differences a little later on in the video. Spoilers from here on out. If you'd like to go into the TV series without them, this is your last chance to click away. The show opens in much the same way the game does, but it's far earlier in the day, starting in about the morning, and we catch up with Sarah and Joel going about a normal day in 2003, interacting with neighbors, going to work, going to school. The audience joins Sarah as she goes to school, gets a present for her father's birthday, and comes home to spend some time with the elderly neighbors. Better her than me. Finally, she's at home, and we get the scene that starts the game, the two of them on the couch celebrating his birthday with the gift of a watch, and eventually leading to the flight from the outbreak and the scenes of chaos as the pair are joined by Tommy, and they attempt to quickly escape the spreading panic. A quick side note I'd like to go on here. In both the game and the TV series, it's very refreshing to see Joel portrayed as generally a good dad. He tells goofy jokes like pretending the watch doesn't work. He's lighthearted, but always worried about her. And this is a far cry from the stereotype of absentee or uncaring dads that has often been in popular culture in the last few decades. So props to them. Alright, philosophical appreciation over. Let's get back to the show. The show mostly sticks to the same story beats as the opening of the game, with the flight from home, a hectic cross-country drive, and into town slowly being consumed by the madness as the outbreak stops being faraway news stories told on the radio or on TV and become reality. Huh. What does that remind me of? Not important. Continuing the trend of hitting the faithful story beats, it ends sadly with Sarah not surviving a chance encounter with a soldier and dying in Joel's arms. The emotions in this scene are very palpable, and Pascal does a wonderful job conveying the father who tried everything, but still failed. Jumping ahead, the show skips forward 20 years later now, and Joel is working for ration cards, the currency of the quarantine zones. Somehow over the last 2 decades he has found himself up near Boston instead of Texas. He's cremating the infected and later trying to get a plan together to go find his brother who has disappeared. He is slowly but surely gathering the materials and supplies to get a vehicle and go outside the QZ. He just needs a battery and he can go. Once more picking up the threads put down by the game, the show follows Joel and his partner Tess as they deal with a short-changing colleague Robert, the revolutionary Fireflies. Robert has scammed both Joel and Tess and the Fireflies over the same battery, although the latter have definitely taken much more offense at this. The ensuing gunfight leaves Robert and a good chunk of the Boston Fireflies dead. Once again, leaving Joel and Tess in charge of a young Ellie. The final moments of the show have our heroes escaping the QZ and heading into Boston to bring Ellie to the other Fireflies at the State Building, in exchange for supplies so they can go on their search for Tommy. As soon as they seem to be in the clear, away from the wall, out of the spotlight, a soldier stops them and begins to arrest them. As with every arrest in the show and in the game, a scan is done of them to detect possible infection. Joel, bing, clear. Tess, bing, clear. Ellie, well, she stabs him before we can find out, and Joel finishes off the soldier by repeatedly striking him. However, the scanner has confirmed what we all feared. Ellie was infected, and as she desperately tries to explain that she's immune, Tess and Joel have to figure out quite quickly what they're going to do as more soldiers are on their way. Do they keep their contract, or do they kill her here and now? The final shot is of the trio running into a thunderstorm-stricken Boston, as lightning flashes and reveals the leaning towers from the game. This is just a quick summary of the episode, and I have skipped some parts, and others will be brought up in a moment. So far so good. Overall, the episode sticks to the early moments of the game, and the main story beats are hit quite well in my opinion. But let's talk about the differences, because there are some that make sense, some that make no sense, and a lot that fall in the middle. To start, the episode starts with a moment that feels so out of place, I forget about it every time I finish thinking about it. It's an old-style 70s or 80s, maybe even 60s interview between two fictional doctors, portrayed by John Hannah and Christopher Heyerdahl. These two are being asked about the possibility of an outbreak from virus or bacteria. While Heyerdahl's character seems worried about these, Hannah's character seems amused. When asked why, Hannah states that humanity always triumphs over these outbreaks, just like in war, and the one he truly fears are the fungi. Fungi like cordyceps that can infect but have no cure. And this is where I've lost the relevance of the scene. He states that normally our body temperatures kill these fungi before they can infect us, but if the world were to warm up ever so slightly, they could. So at the beginning of our highly anticipated TV adaptation of a video game, we get global warming? Now, I'm not here to talk about climate change, but given this is never mentioned again, I have to wonder why they felt compelled to add it. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy to see Hannah, Heyerdahl, and all the other actors in the scene make some money, and it's always better when Jonathan from the Good Mummy movie shows up. But the scene is so out of place. Every time I've rewatched the episode, I keep forgetting it's there. What was I talking about? Not important. The show starts with an elongated opening sequence in pre-outbreak Texas, giving us a far more in-depth view of what the world was like before the outbreak. We spend a lot more time with Sarah as she goes about her day, and we see how she gets the watch fixed. While this is going on, we hear more and more about what's happening in the world, from faraway reports of odd violence, and it seems to pick up more and more, culminating in her visit to the watch store where she's hustled out the door by the owners, because they are eager to get home. We see a classmate of hers in an earlier scene with a medical alert bracelet seem to judder. And then, moments later, when we're in the elderly home baking cookies, we see the elderly mother begin to shake as well, and the dog begins to whimper while looking at her, indicating something is wrong. Now, the show has removed the spores that the game makes such an integral part of infection, because this is how fungus spreads in real life. Instead, it seems to hint that the outliers are the young, the old, and the immunocompromised, being susceptible to infection, and allowing them to infect the ones with stronger immune systems. This is just a theory of mine, as the medical alert bracelet could also just suggest more time in hospital, and the old neighbor is said to have spent a lot of time in hospital. And as we all know, there's some dangerous infections that are in hospitals. A different theory I have heard floating around is the flour theory. Sarah and Joel are seen throughout the day not eating flour. At breakfast they have eggs because Joel forgot the pancake mix. Throughout the episode, the pair and Tommy don't seem to eat anything with flour in it, avoiding biscuits and cookies. Later, Joel forgets to bring home a cake for them to celebrate his birthday, once again evading flour. Now, I haven't gone over the entire theory, and a link to the Reddit post that started this will be in the description. If it's true, it's an interesting addition to the show. Now for a big change at the beginning. Instead of a faceless neighbor family, the first violent infected we see are the kind elderly neighbors. And instead of using a gun, we see Joel use a wrench to protect Sarah. This is where I begin to have questions. Why? My knee-jerk reaction was because this was from the Baldwin tragedy involving guns, so they didn't want to use it. But Tommy has a gun, so why didn't Joel have a pistol? Now, I have two possible theories, and I must stress these are just that. First, the showrunner for the show has made comments about deaths in video games meaning less than deaths on TV, saying something along the lines of it's just pixels dying and not real people. I mean, they aren't on TV either, unless this is a really dedicated cast. I'm inclined to think this because Sarah's death in the show versus the game feels more drawn out, and while I'm not disparaging the scene or how it's acted by either actor, it does feel like it's that bit of information in your notes that you highlight in your textbook before a test. It feels like the show wants this to be really front and center, and it should be, but I can't explain it. It feels like it goes on a little too long. But then again, why'd they start with the Nope, I already went over that. I think highlighting it runs the risk of cheapening the other quiet moments we see of Joel even two decades later as he struggles with his loss. And another theory I have, and again, let's slap on those extra tinfoil hats, Minor spoils for the second game, by the way. In the opening act of the second game, Joel is beaten to death with a golf club in a brutal fashion by the daughter of someone from the first game. This caused quite a bit of controversy, and I'm not here to talk about that, so we're going to move past it. But I can't help but wonder, is this the start of a subplot, or a subliminal arc, where we see an uncontrollable rage monster in Joel as a way to justify this horrific end? Now, before I lose you, let me explain. In the opening moments of the 2003 part, we see Joel unable to get up until someone reminds him. We see him use a wrench to beat an old woman to death, and all he knows is she's attacking his daughter. Later, when we first meet Tess, she outright says that Joel will do as she tells him. He's later seen gathering the weapons he has on hand and just wandering behind Tess to get Robert. And only because she told him so? While in the game this does happen, it feels more like a mutual decision. In the show it felt one-sided. Another time the show changes a pistol headshot kill is at the end when the soldier is beaten to death by Joel. Could this be seen as a character who should not be left unattended? Is this show setting him up as a monster that in turn deserves his fate? A fair chunk of the controversy surrounding it was how the character was dealt with, because he was a fairly well-liked character, to die in an extremely brutal fashion. If this is revenge, why not stab him? Or shoot him? Why does Joel end up with an end that rivals another of Pascal's character, the Prince of Dorne from Game of Thrones, whose head gets crushed? Could this be the show setting Joel up as someone who cannot be left to make his own choices, and will always pick the worst thing? Now I'm going to move back to my other points about difference, because I can see eyeballs glazing. Now, we knew the old neighbors were probably going to be evils and or die. They made oatmeal raisin cookies. The woman literally sets herself up using the devil's fruit. Nice try, not today, Satan. In seriousness, I am left to wonder if, because the show is opposed to a game, making the neighbors elderly is supposed to be more shocking, given the juxtaposition with the violence we see later on, versus how quiet their home is earlier. But now I have to get to the biggest complaint I have. The worst of the worst. This is the kind of meddling TV executives can't keep getting away from. The burn-in farmhouse at the beginning, it's on the left side of the road instead of the right. Those monsters! Alright. Back to seriousness for a while. I only kind of promise. In the show, the flight of the heroes is stopped when their vehicle is struck by parts from an exploding airplane that fell from the sky, versus the game, where it's another motorist that strikes their vehicle. The outcome, of course, is the same. Sarah is injured and the trio have to flee on foot, but the show's version feels more sensationalized to me. I prefer the random motorist hitting them, because it's just someone else fleeing. They don't see them, it's dark, it's chaotic, and we end up with this accident that just happens. This wasn't some great disaster that upended their escape and resulted in Sarah's death. It was just an accident that happens every day. And that made this, it fit the tone of the story more for me, that it was nothing special, nothing sensational. Just something that happens and can happen to any one of us at any time. Moving on to the post-time skip part of the episode. To start, instead of just jumping straight in with Joel and Tess, we're greeted by the scene of a young child walking towards what seems like a welcoming safe zone, only later to realize that the child's been infected and was killed by the soldiers so no one else could be infected. In the game, we're introduced to this world through a walk with Joel and Tess through the streets where fear is palpable from all angles. Who will cause trouble today? The fireflies? The soldiers? A random stranger who just happens to decide their favorite thing to do today is stab you? I find this change does make some sense. It shows quite quickly that the regime running this zone is not kind. Not the people you'd want to trust. And I think it's an example of showing up front versus showing through exploration. And the latter works much better in games versus TV shows, because we are given the same implications as we go on this walk with Joel and Tess, but does the episode really have 20 minutes for us to go for a walk with them? Now, one of the odder changes post-time skip for me is this new Tommy subplot. The show heavily implies that Tommy has gone missing just before the start of the show, and this is drastically different than the game, where Joel and Tommy haven't spoken for years, due to an argument the previous had happened. But the show makes it seem like Joel is moving as fast as he can to go rescue his little brother. Perhaps an explanation is forthcoming in later episodes, but as of episode 1, this feels more like a random change made for TV audiences. a difference for the sake of being different. Next up in changes, let's talk about Robert. At least, again, we're talking, in my opinion, the Robert in the game, he's still a slimy double-dealing jerk, but he actually goes out of his way to, stick to the cliche. In the show, he's almost downright apologetic to Tess for her beating. He's constantly looking around to the floor or the walls, anywhere but Tess's eyes, and it makes him seem more like a businessman that had screwed up in the pre-outbreak, rather than the double-dealing survivor he's made out to be in the game. Tess and Joel still got scammed, but when they came knocking, he and his men in the game shot back, and it seemed just like a part of life to everyone. This paints a far bleaker picture than this squirming, sad sack of a man who's almost apologizing. Is he Canadian? What's going on? The gaming interaction with him starts with Tess being jumped with his guys in the same way, and it's heavily implied he did it in order to get away with his scam. But in the show, it's almost comic relief. A bump in the road, a doorstop. I mean, it's a little literal if you've seen the episode, but we'll move past that. On to Tess. In the games, it's implied through their interactions that she and Joel are equals, partners in their smuggling operation, with both working to keep each other alive and afloat. While she does lead Joel to Robert, as I mentioned earlier, it's because she knows where he is, and eagerly takes the contract with the Fireflies, as opposed to the show where she seems significantly more hesitant. This version of Tess seems more manipulative and passive-aggressive than the Tess of the game, because in the game, she outright shoots Robert in the head for what he's done and for trying to scam them. The show makes it seem like she'd try to resolve things peacefully, or would blame Joel if anything happened to Robert. Let me know in the comments if you disagree. This brings me to another big change that just really bothers me. The cargo Robert stole. In the show, it's a car battery for a truck for this new Tommy subplot. In the game, it's a load of guns. Why make this change aside from the lining up with Tommy's subplot? I'm happy to be proven wrong with later episodes, but for now, in episode 1, in a vacuum, it feels superfluous to me. Once again, a change just to be different from the game. The guns, and the later offer of double guns, is what convinces Tess to take up the contract with the Fireflies for Ellie in the first place. And this makes her lack of involvement in Robert's death feel like a contributing factor to the violent Joel theory I mentioned earlier. With her outright murder of Robert early in the game, it shows she's just as willing to be violent when needs be, whereas the show, and again, this may be due to some of the changes moving forward, there may be plenty of moments later on, it seems to imply she feels like she's the one holding Joel's leash, and he's the violent one. For my final thoughts on the episode, it's surprisingly good given the history of video game adaptations considered to be, quote, good, even if they're just average. I wonder as I looked on the changes I noticed how faithfully the series will follow the game. We're all of one episode in, and there's still loads of time for this to either be a sensation or business as usual for an adaptation. Will they follow the next series of events at the drop-off? Will they then follow the series of events with Bill and Frank to the same dark ending for the two of them? Will the actors continue to be able to convey the heavy moments ahead? I personally definitely hope so, and HBO has at least bought my attention for one more episode. But what do you think? Was it good? Did you see the changes I did? Am I completely crazy and in possession of too many tinfoil hats? Please leave a comment below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and giving my channel a subscription. I'm going to keep trying to keep covering things like this. I've been John, the nerd with no job, and that's just been my nerdy take. Thanks, and have a great day.